Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and I'm here today with Fern Schumer Chapman, author. And today's episode is going to be on Brothers, Sisters, Strangers about security versus avoidance with sibling estrangement. So the big question we have is there a difference between security-based behaviors and avoidance-based behaviors with sibling estrangement? And we'll attempt to answer that today. What do you think, Fern?
Oh, I think this is such a murky area. It's so easy to rationalize avoidance and non-confrontation, and I'm so good at it. So I'll be curious to hear what you have to say about it. One of the dangers, I think, of avoidant behavior is it can lead to its own form of self-gaslighting. So you start to actually buy into your gaslighters or your narcissistic siblings' perception of yourself. And then you have this terrible confusion over who you are and what you can say.
Absolutely. I think that if we're not careful, we can really get caught up in these type of things. And I think that it's key too, especially just to recognize what we can do and really distinguish the difference between those two important aspects, because we can fall into these avoidance traps, you know. And I always think it's good to start off by just saying, what do security-based behaviors look like? We know it's about feeling good about ourselves and making choices based on that. But usually the thing is that it'll show in our actions, implicitly or deliberately. And when they're pretty much implicit, the people that are secure will usually have very important boundaries that are already in place, whether they've worked on them or they've internalized them to some shape or form. One of them is basically just verbal boundaries by keeping conversation short, choosing not to respond in some cases, giving trying not to give emotional-based answers that cause you to fall into justification or defensiveness and such. Your feelings aren't really up for debate.
Right. And actually, when you're out in the world, you can really identify these people who struggle with this because they're spilling out all over the place.
Yeah, that's very true. So I think that it's important also to recognize that, boundaries and security-based behaviors can also be psychological, right? Choosing what you expose your mind to is especially important, right? If we're lurking on social media, for example, ruminating over what's been said or done, just being conscious of that in terms of recognizing where the traps and the pitfalls lie, I think. And good boundaries can be sometimes even to know where the exits are if you're going to family function where you think it's gonna go from bad to worse. Sometimes you have to recognize that. And a good question to ask ourselves is whether we're limiting the time with the demanding people in general.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is tied to some of what we've discussed previously
Yeah.
about self-esteem.
Yeah, actually,
people with low self-esteem have a really tough time with setting boundaries.
absolutely, and that's a very good, because that's very true, because you make choices based on that. And a lot of times, people that have low self-esteem will, for example, not have these type of boundaries in place, like choosing who can touch and not touch you, for example, choosing what you do with your body, recognizing that certain situations may not necessarily serve you well. So having someone there with you in certain situations, for example, can also be something that a security-based person will do just to basically maintain their boundaries. So,
well, and here's the really tricky part. If you are in a sibling estranged relationship, it affects your self-esteem.
yeah.
And you do not have the level of confidence to set boundaries because you feel crappy about yourself to begin with, and you don't believe you deserve better.
Well, that's the thing, right? So that's one of the things I find that happens with a lot of people is that they fall into these patterns, and these patterns end up dictating to them how they should live. And some of these patterns are avoidance-based as well, because Oftentimes, some examples of avoidance that people can fall into if they're not careful can cause them different types of difficulties in their own lives. So, I mean, it's normal that we don't want to have pain in our own lives. We don't want to expose ourselves to trauma or to situations where that there's going to be challenges with a difficult or toxic sibling relationship. So oftentimes we fall into these patterns, and one of the things that happens is situational avoidance, where we tend to basically avoid certain social activities, or either on a personal or professional level, just because it makes us uncomfortable. So I
Well,
think that,
I think
yeah,
that's especially true, Ali John, when there's trauma in history.
yeah,
So the trauma affects self-esteem and of course creates a resistance to confrontation, because many who have been, say, abused feel that they will be punished for using their voice. And so that's just reinforced and reinforced. And the problem with this is it's not just occurring with the sibling you're estranged from, it's occurring in many other relationships as well as the workplace.
yeah, exactly. So it generalizes itself in other areas of a person's life,
Right.
and like you said, I mean, in some ways it can start in our own minds in that way, and it goes from there. And I think that that's the thing that can happen, and that leads us into cognitive avoidance, where basically what ends up happening is if we start to think too much about certain things, then we'll start to say to ourselves, well, don't think about that, or basically just try to suppress some of those thoughts if they become negative in that way. Sometimes we can numb ourselves through with regards to intrusive thoughts. And I think that a lot of times people can lose themselves in repetitive phrases or daydreams or even prayers. Though they're helpful, I'm not dismissing that. I think they can be, but it shouldn't be something that prevents us from doing the actual work that creates long-standing relief for ourselves, basically.
Well, or if it tips into rumination, which is something we have addressed here, as well as I've addressed in psychologytoday.com blogs. If you start to feel like you're ruminating on this stuff, that's extremely unproductive.
Yeah, that's the thing too. So, and at the same time, sometimes rumination can cause us to want to become overcompensating in some shape or form. And the thing with that is that if we're not careful, we can fall into what's called protective avoidance. And with protective avoidance, what happens is it can look very much like safety, in terms of preparing ourselves, over checking, spending excessive amounts of time in preparation. And it can be obsessive compulsive in some ways. But the thing with that is that if we lose ourselves in details, what ends up happening is that, we can try to just put a lot of mental energy into that. And it can actually cause us to just basically just not basically put our energies into the right places, because we're so busy trying to put the walls up and trying to protect ourselves that we lose ourselves in the process, in that, rather than actually getting to the end result, which is actually to feel better.
And we don't have the clarity as to whether we're being protective or avoidant. So I think there's a tendency when you're non-confrontational to justify this behavior by saying, oh, I'm protecting myself, when in fact what you're really doing is avoiding confrontation and setting boundaries.
Exactly. So I think that that's important, just to recognize that. And of course, there's what we call somatic avoidance as well, that's present too. And this is basically about working very hard at not experiencing sensations that resemble emotional or bodily distress or discomfort. So if people have had anxiety symptoms where they get sweaty palms, heart racing, tightness in the chest, and those type of things, they can sometimes confuse anxiety with feelings of excitedness. And when that happens, then all of a sudden, anything that riles us up or actually excites us, even on a positive level, can cause us in some ways to basically think that it's too close to anxiety, so we'll just shut down. So, people choose sometimes not to go to family gatherings, and because they're concerned that they're going to fall into some sort of power game with their sibling, for example.
And those who have a significant trauma in their history have a tendency anyway to cut their heads off from their body. So
Yep.
they don't even perceive what's going on. They don't even identify what is an anxiety symptom. And it takes a long time to become aware of your own body and say, oh, when I feel that in my lungs, when I have a shortness of breath, that's actually anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. So in some ways, there needs to be a distinction between the two. And the last one basically is substitution avoidance. Now, sometimes what happens with this type of behavior is basically you're substituting one feeling for another feeling that's more positive. So it's kind of like a flight mode where people are basically using distracting behaviors for like through work, food, sex, gambling, shopping, drugs, for example, anything that can actually avoid an unpleasant issue. So I think that, I see this sometimes with some people where they start to eat their emotions, basically, after a challenging contact with their sibling or whatnot. So I think that that's an example of just something to kind of be careful of in terms of masking the situation.
And I think there's a real danger in all this because you can lapse into enabling the behavior. So you've avoided it and you don't want to confront and you don't want to set a healthy boundary. And the next thing you know, you're actually rubber stamping the behavior that you can't stand. So yeah. I think it's really important to be aware of all this. And I think there's some critical questions to ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? What does my behavior accomplish or perpetuate? And what other ways can I deal with this situation?
All very good questions, and I think that's a good ending note for today's session because I realize we're almost out of time here. But yeah, it goes by so fast. But yeah, those are good ending questions. And I think that leaves our viewers with some points to ponder, especially in light of the questions that we've brought up. So hopefully today's topic was answered to our viewers' liking, of course, and we do welcome questions, of course, with regards to this and any other subject matters pertaining to sibling estrangement. So let's talk about resources. So we know that we, of course, continue to do our Zoom group with regards to online support for sibling estrangement. So you can, of course, get in touch with me with regards to that. As need be. The group is twice monthly, so it helps to break isolation and it helps to have people of like mind to speak with that can be very empowering and such. You also have your Psychology Today articles that are great for, I find very informative and very enlightening as well in the mainstream, which is great. It's great that they're talking about this more now. Siblingestrangement.com website also has informative articles that I have with regards to sibling estrangement and such. And of course, there is the Facebook page, Sibling Estrangement Sharing, Coping, Connecting, which is the Facebook group that we have, which is private, which is a good place to get support with people of like mind to help to develop more understanding about this. And of course, there's your book, of course, Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, Sibling Estrangement and the Road to Reconciliation, which is a great read. Also, I do recommend it to our viewers. And basically, I think that this is a good map for getting some help with regards to sibling estrangement.
Right. I wish I had had all these resources when I was going through it at my worst, a decade ago. Yes. I'm just so excited about the robust community we have developed, and more people are joining us. And the more people who contribute, I find I think about things in new ways. So I'm always happy to read the comments and hear your responses to our videos. It's always great to be with you, Ali John, and thank you again for doing this. I think it's such important work.
Well, thank you again. And of course, I just want to let our viewers know to subscribe or like our YouTube page as well, because it helps us to get the word out. If you want to share some of our videos, please do so. I very much look forward to doing this again with you, Fern.
Me too.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.